Hey everybody, welcome back. This is part 2 in our series on object-oriented programming in Apex. Today we are going to be discussing encapsulation. So if you remember from the first video, we talked about there are 4 principles to OO, and that is encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, and polymorphism. In the first video, we actually didn't really discuss any of these. We just talked about classes, objects, properties, and constructors, and how we can chain constructors together. So, I mean, it's fundamental to working with objects in any programming, any object-oriented programming language, in any object-oriented programming language, is being able to create objects, right? So now let's get into the first principle, which is encapsulation, or essentially like how do we keep our private stuff private? How do your objects keep their business, their state to themselves? So bring up a quick definition that I like. This is on stackify.com. And I'm going to go to this paragraph right here. This concept is often used to hide the internal representation or state of an object from the outside. And that way, if we have an attribute that is not visible, we say other things can't change it. This is information hiding. And I think the best way to probably just dive in and make sense of this, we're going to go back to our code, and we're going to go back to the car class that we worked on last time. And right now, you can see we have the car class has got 3 public properties: make, model, and year. And right now, we've got back down there in our debug log exactly what we'd expect. Car Mustang, right? We create this car. And in our console, yeah, we can see that's exactly, created exactly what we wanted. But because these are all public, that means anything, any code running, any other developer can access them. So we've got our Mustang object, but now there's something else could grab that, and let's say Mustang make equals Subaru. Those are nice. I have a Subaru. All right. And now we're going to Mustang. We'll debug Mustang again. Run that. And so now you can see we have a Subaru Mustang, which makes no sense at all, right? Subaru doesn't make Mustangs. So we wouldn't want that to be able to happen. And this is obviously a simplistic example. You won't write a lot of car objects representing cars in most of your enterprise code, but the principle is never, ever going to change, right? So in a lot of other programming languages, and I'll use, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but we'll use Java, for example. What we would do is make that private, and then you would write getters and setters, right? So you would say something like public, we're going to return a string, get make, and, return this dot make, right? We would do something like that. And, if we wanted to set it, we would write a setter, public set make. And that's how, if we could make this a read or a write only property, we would put obviously we need a string in here. Right? And this dot make equals make, right? And that's how we would make all of this work. And we can do the exact same thing in Apex, actually, thankfully, with writing a little bit less boilerplate code. But that concept of private, of read and write, read-only properties does not change. So I'm going to get rid of these because we don't actually ever need to write these in Apex. We're going to go up here. And so in Apex, one of the things you remember is your access modifier. Private is very restrictive. So if you make a variable, a property private, it is only going to be accessible from inside the class, unless you start doing things like I just showed you, writing kind of these explicit getters and setters. What is easier to do in Apex, and a feature of the language, is to add the access modifiers up here. So we're going to put a set of curly braces, and we want to make our read only, right? You can get it, but it can only be set through the constructor. So we would do get, and then private set colon. And so now if we did the same thing for these, right? So curly, I always set the syntax is a little funny. Get private set. And get rid of that final semicolon there. I got a red. Oh, private, because private, we got to do private what? Private set. And we could even, for example, if we made this one, in fact, I'll make one of each. So we'll do this is going to be, year's going to be get set. Year's read and write. And then we can modify the year to whatever we want. And model will be private set. Make is going to be private get, private set. All right, so really it can't be, you really would never do that. It can only be set in the constructor, but we'll, so now let's take a look. So we've got our same code, and we're going to try to update this. Run the exact same thing that we ran before. And how about I got to compile this first? Run it. And we should get an error, right? So visible variable is not visible. Car.make. So you can't change this anymore, right? It is up here. This is not a read write only. It's its attributes are set to private. So we can no longer update the make except in the constructor, which is exactly what we want. So let's get rid of those two lines. Run it again. And so what we did, so I'm going to show you what each one of these looks like. So in our call, because we made make private that way, if I wanted to do system.debug Mustang.make, this should throw an error. Yeah, because so I could get it if I access the entire Mustang object, but if I just try to access that property, it's private now. I can't see it. Now model, right? So but I could still do system.debug Mustang.model, and I could even change the year because I left the year, you remember, as read or write. Mustang.year, I'm going to say equals 1965. Oh, we got need an equal sign there though. 1965. And we'll do a system.debug. And again, we are just going to access the property directly because we made it read and write. Mustang.year. We're going to run that. And so you can see, because we can't access string at all. And honestly, if you're going to do private get, private set, you might as well just make this private instead of, but if you want to make them read only or read and write, this is the way you're going to do it. Public, and then the get, private set, or just the get set. And that accomplishes the same thing as writing those slightly more verbose getters and setters I showed you earlier. So this is how we keep other code, other developers from changing the state of our objects. The last thing I want to show you that is sort of a feature of the Apex language is the test visible. Test visible. And let's say, I don't know, we have a private string. I'm just going to call it secret code. All right? Not going to put any getters or setters on there. I'm just going to leave it private like that. And I'm going to go down here and I'll just, I don't know, throw something over there. This secret code equals crypto dot get random image. Now, if we go to our test, right? So because we made that test visible, we can see this in our, if there was some reason we needed to access that variable in our unit test, I could say car Mustang, right, equals car, and I could do Mustang.secret code equals, so, you know, or I could access it, I could modify it, right? If I took this test visible property off, went back to my test, now I can no longer access that property. So this is a real quick introduction to encapsulation. Hope it was useful for you, and we got a lot more interesting stuff to talk about with object-oriented programming coming up. If it was useful, please take a second and hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.